Welcome back to today's Explainer. We've got something incredibly fascinating to unpack today. We're going to be looking at an ancient parable from Osho's famous 1001 Tales series. And what I absolutely love about this specific story is how it just kind of sneaks up on you. At first, it feels like a simple joke, a lighthearted little folktale. But by the end of it, it completely transforms into this crystal clear mirror reflecting the hidden workings of our own minds. So let's jump right in and see what this ancient wisdom has to show us.
Okay, picture this vividly. A king is traveling through his kingdom in this magnificent golden chariot. He's just passing through a dusty village road, probably expecting absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. But then, he notices something truly extraordinary. On the trunk of every single tree lining the road, there's a target drawn in chalk. And right in the dead center of every single target, the absolute perfect bullseye, is an arrow. We're talking dozens of trees, dozens of targets, and not a single miss. The sheer mathematical impossibility of it completely boggles the king's mind. He's looking at the work of a prodigy, right? A master archer whose skill just completely defies logic. You gotta wonder, how is this even possible?
Well, the king immediately orders his chariot to halt. He is awestruck, and he demands to meet this master archer. He wants to recruit this absolute genius for his royal army. The villagers hear all the king's commotion and a crowd begins to gather. But strangely, they aren't looking at the king with reverence. They are laughing, like genuinely belly laughing. Parting the crowd, they push forward the master archer. But instead of some seasoned, eagle-eyed warrior, the king is presented with a young man who looks, quite frankly, entirely vacant. The king is just utterly bewildered.
Looking at this unassuming, simple young man, the king is desperate for answers. He leans down and asks, "What is your secret? How do you never miss?" The young man looks up at the king, completely earnest, and says, "I cannot lie to you, your majesty. My secret is very simple. First, I shoot the arrow into the tree, and then I take my chalk and I draw the circle around it." It's brilliant, isn't it? The punchline just lands perfectly. The illusion of mastery is completely shattered by the most hilariously simple cheat imaginable.
It's a great joke, for sure. But let's actually pause here for a second. Let's slow down and look a little deeper. Because Osho doesn't tell this story just to make us laugh. He uses this parable to land one of his sharpest, most profound observations about the human condition, specifically about intellectuals and how we all think. You see, this isn't a story about one foolish kid in a village. This is actually a perfect description of the operating system of the human mind. It's about the trick we are constantly pulling on reality itself.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this breaks down exactly how we do it. Think about how we usually form our worldviews. Step 1, we arrive at a belief. Maybe it comes from our childhood, our upbringing, our temperament, or just some random life experience. Basically, we shoot the arrow. Step 2, we spend years, sometimes our entire lives, selectively collecting evidence that supports that initial belief. Step 3, we construct elaborate philosophies and arguments to prove our arrow landed perfectly. We simply retrofit the data to match the conclusion we've already made.
And here is the real kicker. Once that target is drawn, the conclusions appear absolutely flawless to anyone who doesn't know the strategy, and that includes ourselves. Whether it's our political stance, our philosophical outlook, or our carefully curated spiritual framework, the whole shebang looks incredibly sound and rational. But Osho is warning us here. These perfectly constructed worldviews might just be chalk circles that we've meticulously drawn around arrows we fired blindly years or even decades ago.
To really grasp this, let's look at how this ancient trick plays out in our modern everyday lives. Once you start looking, it's literally everywhere. It's the brilliant researcher who unconsciously designs their experiments in a way that just magically confirms their initial hypothesis. Or think about the insecure friend who's already decided someone doesn't like them and then reads every single text message, every glance, every passing interaction as absolute proof of that dislike. Or, it's the spiritual seeker who decides they've reached this elevated state of enlightenment and then interprets every little coincidence in their life as the universe confirming their special status. Arrow first, target second.
So this brings us to the absolute hardest question of this entire explainer. And I want you to really think about this for a second. How can you tell from the inside if your conclusions about life, about yourself, about others are actually real? Are you shooting and seeing or shooting and drawing? Are you genuinely shooting an arrow and seeing exactly where it lands in reality? Or are you shooting, closing your eyes, and then frantically drawing a circle around it so you never have to face the discomfort of missing the mark? Because let me tell you, it is remarkably difficult to tell the difference when you're the one holding the bow.
And the reason it's so difficult to tell is perhaps the most humbling part of this whole parable.
That young man in the story, he actually had one up on us. He knew he was faking it. He knew he was the one holding the chalk. Most of us don't even have that level of self-awareness. When we pull the archer's trick, the circle drawing happens entirely below the level of our conscious awareness. Our ego just does it automatically, to protect us from being wrong, from being uncertain, or from feeling lost. We truly, deeply believe we're master archers.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core distinction Osho is making in the source material, the difference between intellectual understanding and what he calls existential understanding. Let that sink in for a moment. The intellectual mind desperately needs to control the narrative. It needs the world to make sense according to its own rules. So it shoots and then immediately draws the target to impose order. It's a closed loop. Existential understanding, on the other hand, requires surrendering that control. It's about experiencing reality exactly as it is, without that protective layer of our pre-drawn conclusions.
So, what's the antidote to this blind spot? Well, according to Osho, it is the strategy of the mystic. The mystic fires the arrow into the vast unknown of life, and then they just watch. They simply observe where the arrow lands in reality. If it lands in the dirt, it lands in the dirt. If it hits a tree, it hits a tree. They observe without judgment and, most importantly, without immediately reaching into their pocket for a piece of chalk to draw a conclusion and make themselves look good. They let reality dictate the truth, rather than letting their ego dictate reality.
This brings us to a really crucial concept, the gap. The gap is that quiet, uncomfortable, kind of vulnerable space between taking an action or having an experience and forcing a neat little conclusion upon it. The intellectual mind hates the gap. It rushes to fill it with a chalk circle as fast as possible. But the mystic? The mystic lives in the gap, because it's only in that open space of not knowing, of resisting the urge to immediately validate our preconceived notions, that true seeing actually happens. The big question for you is, can you hold that gap open in your own life?
Let's make this super practical before we wrap up. I want to encourage a moment of intense personal reflection here. Bring to mind a specific belief you hold really tightly right now. Maybe it's a belief about your own limitations. Maybe it's a judgment you hold about a family member or a colleague, or a really rigid political stance. Where in your life are you absolutely certain you hit the bullseye? I challenge you to consider, is it possible, just possible, you're pulling the archer's trick right there? I know it's uncomfortable to admit. Actually, the discomfort of realizing we might be holding the chalk, that is exactly the point of this explainer. That discomfort, that is the beginning of waking up.
So, as we close today, I don't want to give you a neat, tied-with-a-bow conclusion. I want to leave you with the very question this ancient mirror reflects back at us. Where in your life have you shot the arrow first and then quietly drawn the target around it? Think about that. Sit with it, in that gap. And until next time, try to just shoot and see where it lands.